Beneath the postcard beauty of the Cotswolds, the rolling green hills, the honey-colored stone, the villages frozen in time, lies another landscape. One you won't find in the tourist brochures. A landscape of whispers, of shadows, of footsteps that fall where no one walks. For centuries, this place has been a crossroads of life and death. Ancient tombs older than the pyramids. Battlefields where blood once ran in the gutters. Abbeys torn apart in a single decree. Grand houses built to last forever, yet echoing with the griefs of those who lived within. Here, folklore is not forgotten. Witches' curses cling to withered trees. Corpse roads wind across the hills. The black dog still walks at night. And the land itself, the limestone, the ridges, the old trackways, seems to hold memory like breath in the cold air. Why does this quiet corner of England have more ghost stories than some entire counties? Why do so many people, from farmers to travelers to skeptics, leave with tales they cannot explain? In this film, we'll travel through 6,000 years of haunted history, from the first stone monuments to the shadowed manors, from Civil War skirmishes to the oldest superstitions still whispered today. And perhaps, along the way, we'll begin to answer the question, why are the Cotswolds so haunted? Before the churches and cottages, before the manor houses and markets, there was a wilder land. A land ruled not by kings, but by the rhythm of the sun and the seasons, by the cycles of birth and death. And its first people left behind more than stones. Across the Cotswolds, ancient monuments rise silently from the earth Neolithic long barrows, Iron Age hill forts, and burial chambers older than the pyramids. These were not mere graves. They were sacred spaces, portals between the worlds of the living and the dead. Designed with astronomical precision, often aligned with the solstices, they were built not only to honor the ancestors, but perhaps to keep them close. Bellas Knap, near Winchcombe, is among the most haunting of these sites. Its name means the beautiful hill, but its beauty hides mystery. The tomb's grand facade includes a false entrance, no more than an elaborate deception, perhaps to confuse grave robbers or something less tangible. Some believe it was meant to mislead spirits who might otherwise wander freely. Inside the barrow, archaeologists discovered the remains of at least 38 individuals, men, women, and children, laid out with a ritual precision. Alongside them were offerings, flint tools, pottery vessels, fragments of animal bone, and the charred remnants of ancient fires. These were tokens for the journey into the next world. Visitors today often describe a deep, almost oppressive stillness here. The air turns cold without warning. Some speak of being watched, even followed. One local tale tells of a man who spent the night in the shadow of the barrow. When morning came, he was found with deep scratches across his forearms and no memory of dreaming. To the west lies Ule Long Barrow, or Hetty Pegler's Tump, perched on a windswept ridge near Dursley. Another chambered tomb, its narrow passage leads into dark stone cells. Torches flicker here even when there is no wind, and pale orbs of light have been seen floating around its entrance after nightfall. Paranormal investigators once recorded strange EMF fluctuations here, and several visitors have reported hearing low, guttural murmurs beneath the earth. Some folklorists suggest that these barrows were more than burial places. They were houses for the dead, places of communion. Rites of passage may have been held nearby to honor the dead and ask their counsel. The ancestors in this belief system were not silent. They advised, protected, and sometimes warned. Elsewhere in the Cotswolds, the landscape bears other ancient scars. At Crickley Hill, evidence of prehistoric violence has been uncovered. Smashed skulls and burned structures point to tribal warfare over sacred land. Who knows what energies were stirred in that blood-soaked ground? In Cranham Woods, east of Painswick, ancient oaks cluster thickly, their twisted limbs forming near impenetrable canopies. According to local legend, this was once a place of druidic ritual. The woods are known for their strange acoustics. Voices carry too far or not at all. People have reported losing track of time or emerging hours later with no sense of how long they were gone. One story tells of a girl who vanished while walking her dog. She was found hours later, unharmed but weeping, saying she had walked through a door in the trees. These stories, part archaeology and part legend, have lingered in the Cotswold consciousness for millennia. Even modern researchers speak of a sacred landscape, one shaped as much by belief and memory as by stone and soil. The Cotswold Seven Tombs, like those at West Tump, Nymphsfield and Notgrove, are unique to this region. Their architecture echoes some of the oldest funerary traditions in Britain. Many are aligned to celestial events, sunrise on the winter solstice, or the setting summer sun. These weren't just tombs, they were cosmological monuments binding the fate of the dead to the heavens. One cannot help but wonder, why did these people place so much effort not into defending their homes, but into building sanctuaries for the dead? Did they believe that spirits needed shelter? That the past was a living force? Perhaps these places were never meant to be sealed. Perhaps they are thresholds, gateways, and once opened, they do not always close. Though known today for serenity and slow, quiet days, the Cotswolds has endured centuries of bloodshed. Beneath the golden charm lie wounds cut deep, forgotten conflicts, sieges, betrayals, and executions. Ghosts, it seems, are not born only from great tragedy, but from the repetition of sorrow. The English Civil War tore through the region like a jagged blade. While not as famous as the great battlefields of Naseby or Edgehill, the Cotswolds bore the brunt of small, brutal encounters, often neighbor against neighbor, town against manor. It was a war not of armies alone, but of communities divided. In Cirencester, a town of Roman origin and medieval wealth, the war came in a single night. In February 1643, over 3,000 parliamentarian troops stormed the royalist-held town. Cannon fire shattered the peace. Dozens died defending narrow streets. The parish church of St. John the Baptist, which towers over the market square today, became a temporary garrison, then a prison. Since that time, whispers of haunting persist. Late-night visitors speak of ghostly chanting from the chancel long after the choir has gone. One vicar refused to enter alone after dark. In the upper galleries, a figure has been seen standing, still and robed, watching silently below. It vanishes if approached. Stow-on-the-Wold, a hilltop market town, was the site of the last major battle of the war in March 1646. Royalist troops, exhausted and demoralized, were cornered by the parliamentarian army. The clash was swift and savage. Over 1,000 royalists were captured. Many were cut down in the market square and surrounding fields. According to local accounts, St. Edward's Church became a makeshift hospital and morgue. Blood stained the flagstones. Some say it never quite washed away. The narrow alley leading from the square to the church is still called Deadman's Walk. On windless evenings, passers-by report hearing the tramp of boots behind them, only to find the path empty. Others speak of muffled screams or the sound of swordplay echoing faintly in the dusk. Not far from Stow, Sudeley Castle became a pawn in the conflict. It changed hands repeatedly, garrisoned, plundered, and damaged. Though restored in later centuries, parts of it remain strangely cold. A soldier in tattered uniform is said to pace the battlements, always in silence. Others claim to hear weeping from the Queen's garden, where Queen Catherine Parr, the last wife of Henry VIII, once walked before her death. She is buried in the chapel, but some say her spirit does not always rest. In Malmesbury, one of the oldest continually inhabited towns in England, the war left deep scars. The 7th century abbey, already partly in ruins, was shelled by parliamentarian cannon in 1644. Its broken windows and fractured towers tell the story. Some say the abbey is watched over by a spectral monk, tall, hooded, drifting between the columns before dissolving into shadow. Visitors have described a sudden chill in the air and the sensation of being gently tugged by unseen hands as they approach the old cloisters. But the Civil War was not the first to soak Cotswold soil in blood. During the Wars of the Roses, families were divided, loyalties tested. In Berkeley Castle, the ghost of Thomas Talbot is said to roam murdered during a family feud over succession. On stormy nights, a pale figure is seen walking the battlements with a lantern, always pausing beneath the same window before fading into the rain. And long before that, during the Roman occupation, soldiers marched in tight formation along the Fosse Way, the ancient road that cuts through the region. In Bibury, by the banks of the River Colne, stories persist of phantom legionnaires, always silent, always in single file. A villager once claimed he saw them marching in the mist at dawn, their helmets rimmed with frost. Another said her dog refused to cross the old footpath where they appeared, growling and whimpering as if at something unseen. There are also the forgotten casualties, those not recorded in history books. The farmers hanged for suspected treason, the women accused of spying, the innocents killed in crossfire. Their names are gone, but in village after village, stories remain. In Burford, during the Leveller Uprising of 1649, 3 rebel soldiers were executed by firing squad in the churchyard of St. John the Baptist. Their names are etched into the leaded window. At night, some say red light bleeds through that pane even when the church is unlit. Local children once dared each other to touch the stone wall beside the window. Those who did spoke of icy fingers, and one fainted clean away. And what of the fields that now lie quiet? Many Cotswold villages have hidden plague pits, unmarked graves dug in desperation during outbreaks of Black Death. In Northleach, the ground behind the church dips unnaturally. Local children once called it the Devil's Hollow. Fog is said to cling there even on summer mornings. Horses have refused to walk near it. A retired gravedigger once claimed that when he dug too close, his spade struck bone that crumbled into dust, and a cold wind rose from the earth. This is not a land untouched by violence. It is a land that remembers it, and in its silence, that memory lingers. Blood remembers, and in the Cotswolds, it remembers well. Before the stately homes and wool merchants came, the monks. For centuries, the Cotswolds was a region steeped in sacred ritual, not just of the ancient pagan kind, but of organized religion. Abbeys, priories, and churches stood like sentinels across the hills, their bells marking time, their stones steeped in prayer. But when Henry VIII turned against Rome and the dissolution of the monasteries began in the 1530s, that peace was shattered. Across the Cotswolds, centuries of devotion were uprooted in a matter of months. What followed was not only destruction, but desecration, and with desecration comes unrest. Take Hales Abbey, near Winchcombe. Once a major site of pilgrimage, it drew thousands who came to view a vial said to contain the blood of Christ. This holy blood of Hales made the abbey famous, until reformers declared it a fraud. The monks were expelled, the relic destroyed, and the buildings left to ruin. But the silence left behind was not empty. Local accounts describe shadowy figures glimpsed near the broken arches, especially at dusk. A black-robed monk has been seen walking through the remains of the cloisters, hands clasped in prayer. He disappears into a collapsed wall. Visitors have reported hearing whispered Latin prayers among the ivy-clad ruins, even when no one else is present. In Laycock, the former abbey was turned into a private residence after the dissolution. Yet its long corridors and vaulted cellars seem reluctant to forget their past. One room, once a nun's dormitory, is said to be permanently cold. Guests have described the sound of soft footfalls at night and the gentle creak of doors that no longer open. The most persistent tale is of a veiled figure who appears in the reflection of mirrors but cannot be seen when turned toward. Further west, Tewkesbury Abbey somehow escaped total destruction during the Reformation, but the town itself saw deep division. Monastic lands were seized and shrines demolished. In the years that followed, locals spoke of ghostly chanting in the nave and candles lighting themselves. During restoration works in the 19th century, a workman is said to have fled the crypt, pale and shaking, insisting he had seen 3 monks kneeling before an invisible altar. Smaller religious houses were not spared. Lanthony Secunda Priory, near Gloucester, was stripped of its wealth and left to decay. The grounds are now a park, but those walking the footpaths at twilight sometimes report the smell of incense or the faint toll of a bell that no longer hangs. These hauntings are not of violent death, but of spiritual displacement. These were men and women who had taken vows of silence, chastity, and obedience. Their whole lives were lived within sacred walls. When those walls were torn down, where could their souls go? Even the churches that remained intact bear scars. Northleek Church, sometimes called the Cathedral of the Cotswolds, contains one of the finest collections of medieval brasses in England. The floor is inlaid with images of wool merchants and rectors, their hands folded in eternal prayer. But some say they do not rest as peacefully as they appear. A verger once claimed that the heavy wooden doors of the church slammed shut behind him when no wind stirred. Others speak of an invisible presence standing near the lectern during evening services. Dogs brought into the church for harvest blessings have been known to whimper and stare into corners where no one stands. And in St. Mary's Church in Fairford, known for its magnificent stained glass windows, there are stories of a young acolyte who died in the 16th century, trapped and suffocated during a poorly managed renovation. Children on school visits have asked who the boy in the red robe is, though no such guide or statue exists. The Reformation did not simply end Catholicism in England, it ripped centuries of continuity out by the roots. It broke rituals, shattered communities, and scattered relics that had long been thought holy. The dead, buried with the expectation of prayers and masses said for their souls, found themselves abandoned in spirit as well as body. And if one believes that ghosts are echoes of trauma, then the Reformation was not just a religious revolution, it was a spiritual earthquake. One that still echoes in stone corridors and hollowed chancels, one that left prayers unfinished and souls unanswered. While the Cotswolds may be known today for its thatched cottages and honey-colored farmhouses, it is also a land of grand halls, old manors, and fortified estates built by wealthy families who left their marks not only in stone, but in legend. And where wealth once gathered, so too, it seems, did tragedy. The ghosts of the Cotswolds do not only haunt the humble. From the Tudor age through to the 19th century, aristocratic homes rose like islands in the countryside, lavish, remote, and self-contained. They were built as symbols of status, but their grandeur often concealed private grief, forbidden love, madness, sudden death, and betrayal. And such emotions leave stains that no refurbishment can erase. Take Woodchester Mansion near Nymphsfield. A Gothic revival shell, construction was abandoned mysteriously in the mid-1800s. Workers reportedly fled the site and refused to return. Though never completed, the building stands intact, eerie in its unfinished perfection. No doors, no plaster, no fittings, just stone and silence. Yet, it is not empty. Visitors report voices from rooms that have no floors, footsteps on staircases that lead to nothing. A dark figure is seen at upper windows, though no one is allowed there. A phantom stonemason, still toiling at walls that never saw completion, has been seen by multiple witnesses. The surrounding parkland once hosted Roman villas, and some believe the land itself is disturbed, ancient, unsettled. Then there is Chavenage House near Tetbury. This Elizabethan manor has changed little in centuries, but behind its preserved charm lies a tale of death and dread. During the Civil War, Colonel Nathaniel Stevens, who owned the estate, supported the execution of Charles I. Soon after, he fell into a mysterious decline. The story goes that after his death, a black coach drawn by headless horses arrived at the house. A figure cloaked in shadow entered and drove away with the colonel's corpse. Since then, the ghostly coach has been seen again rattling down the drive in moonlight, stopping at the same door. Members of the family have died suddenly after such sightings. Staff reportedly refuse to enter certain parts of the house alone. In Stanway House, known for its spectacular water fountain and Jacobean architecture, stories circulate of a woman in grey who walks the long gallery at night. A former guest wrote in his journal in 1872 that he woke to see her at the foot of his bed, tall, weeping, and quite without colour. He believed her to be the spirit of Lady Cecilia, who died in childbirth in 1647, locked away in the East Wing while her husband rode to war. She is said to appear most often during storms, staring toward the nursery that was never used. Owlpen Manor, nestled in a wooded valley near Dursley, is smaller more intimate but no less haunted. Legend tells of a girl named Margaret, a servant who fell in love with the squire's son. Their affair was discovered and she was dismissed. Heartbroken and pregnant, she leapt from the upper window into the orchard below. Her ghost young, in a simple shift, has been seen walking through the apple trees. Sometimes she's laughing, sometimes she weeps. Not all ghosts are sad, some are angry. Now owned by the National Trust and famed for its eclectic collection, staff have long reported a sense of being watched. Doors slam with no drafts. Cold spots appear in summer. The sound of clinking glasses and faint laughter has been heard from rooms long empty. Some believe this is the echo of an old solstice feast replaying year after year, as if the house itself remembers the revelry of centuries past. In Calcutta Manor, once a medieval tithe barn turned hotel, cleaners and guests alike have spoken of a heavy atmosphere in one wing of the building. A spectral child is sometimes heard crying always at the same hour. Local folklore speaks of a plague victim who was boarded up within, the builders thinking it more merciful. Whether the story is true or not, that corner of the house remains avoided by staff after dark. And Sudeley Castle, already touched on for its Civil War history, holds deeper layers of haunting. Catherine Parr, Henry VIII's sixth and surviving wife, is buried here. But some say her spirit is not at rest. She was buried hastily, then forgotten until rediscovered centuries later. During restoration, her tomb was opened, and immediately after, workers reported chills, whispers, and sightings of a woman in Tudor dress standing beside the chapel's east wall. One tourist fainted upon seeing her reflection in the stained glass. What binds these tales is not merely the grandeur of the buildings, but the emotional intensity of the lives once lived within them. Love denied, duty betrayed, ambition, grief, loneliness. The upper classes may have lived in comfort, but they were not immune to the same heartbreaks that create hauntings in humbler homes. And perhaps, in such grand settings, the echoes linger longer. A child's cry beneath a gilded ceiling, a lover's last breath behind tapestried walls, a carriage drawn by headless horses rolling toward the courtyard. The great houses of the Cotswolds do not forget, and if you listen carefully, they still speak. Before the churches, and even alongside them, the Cotswolds lived by older rules whispered through hedgerows and carved into the bark of trees. Long after the last pagan priests had vanished, the countryside still clung to its own beliefs, in charms and curses, in black dogs and corpse roads, in witches and the devil's mark. In a land where mist lingers low and paths vanish into the hills, superstition never quite died. In almost every Cotswold village, there are stories passed down like family heirlooms of wise women and cunning men. Not all were feared. Some were sought out for healing, for charms against sickness, or to help a cow calve safely. But others were blamed when the milk soured, or when a child took ill, or when the weather turned foul without warning. One of the most infamous cases comes from the village of North Nibley, where in 1565, a woman known only as Old Nan was accused of casting the evil eye. Crops had failed 2 years running. A local boy had died of fever. Nan, who lived on the edge of the wood and spoke to herself in the lanes, was brought before the justices. There was no trial, only testimony, and soon after, no Nan. She was found hanged from an ash tree said never to grow leaves again. Even today, locals avoid walking beneath it after dusk. In Blockley, a 17th century clergyman recorded that villagers believed one of their own, a woman named Agnes Crouch, could summon storms with her breath. When her chimney was struck by lightning, the townsfolk declared it God's punishment. Agnes fled, but strange weather was said to follow wherever she went. When she died, no priest would bury her. Her grave is said to lie beneath a hawthorn bush outside consecrated ground. Birds never roost there. Then there are the corpse road's narrow tracks, often unnamed, that wind between village and churchyard. Before local burial grounds were common, coffins had to be carried for miles. It was believed that the spirit of the dead could only follow the path it was brought along, so mourners would take convoluted routes or cross-running water to confuse any restless souls. One such path runs between Painswick and Pitchcombe. People still report feeling watched along it, especially in autumn, when the leaves pile high and the wind seems to whisper. A local farmer once told of hearing footsteps behind him, rhythmic and heavy, though the path was empty. The black dog is another recurring figure in Cotswold lore. In Minchinhampton, a spectral hound with eyes like glowing coals is said to roam the common. It walks ahead of travelers, then vanishes, sometimes taking the form of a headless horse. In Broadway, stories speak of a great shaggy beast that appears at crossroads and grave mounds, especially on moonless nights. One motorist in the 1960s swore that a black dog ran alongside his car for nearly a mile, keeping pace at 40 miles per hour before fading like smoke. Such creatures were often seen as omens, not always evil, but never to be ignored. A black dog at the door was said to foretell death, and in more than one case, the sighting preceded a funeral. Cotswold superstition also includes tales of witch bottles containers buried under thresholds filled with pins, nails, and sometimes human hair or urine meant to ward off evil. Several have been found during renovations in villages like Winchcombe and Chipping Campden. Builders often leave them untouched. Better not to meddle, they say. There are also tales of fairy rings in woods near Naunton, where children are warned not to step within circles of mushrooms lest they be taken or returned wrong. A girl in the 1800s was said to have gone missing for 3 days. When found, she spoke of music in the trees and a lady made of petals. Her hair had turned white. In Bisley, the tradition of the Bisley boy speaks to something darker, that Queen Elizabeth I died as a child while staying in the village and was replaced by a local boy to hide the scandal. Though dismissed by historians, the legend persists, and Elizabethan ghosts have been seen at Overcourt, the supposed site of the swap. A tall, androgynous figure in royal garb is said to glide down the staircase, vanishing at the base. Even the flora of the region has its superstitions. Elder trees were believed to house spirits. Cutting one without asking permission could bring bad luck. Rowan trees were planted near doors to keep witches away. And hawthorn was never brought indoors. In Bretforton, an innkeeper who decorated with hawthorn was dead within a week. No one has done so since. These are not ghost stories in the modern sense, no rattling chains or cold hands on the shoulder, but they are part of the same tradition. A deep-rooted belief that the world is alive with meaning, with warnings, with presence. That misfortune has shape and memory. That places remember. In the Cotswolds, folklore is not simply entertainment. It is a form of memory, a survival of older wisdom, and a way of explaining the unexplained, because sometimes superstition is just history we haven't yet understood. To walk the Cotswolds is to feel the past beneath your feet, not just in the ruins and relics, but in the landscape itself, rolling hills, ancient tracks, standing stones. There is something about the land here that seems to hold memory, a kind of resonance, as if every sorrow and secret were etched into the very rock. Some say it's the stone itself. Cotswold limestone, golden and soft, has been quarried and shaped for thousands of years. Every house, wall, church, and tomb bears its mark. It is porous breathable, some say, and perhaps that makes it a vessel for memory. The theory goes that stone can absorb energy, pain, joy, death, and under the right conditions, it can release those memories again. In this view, hauntings are not always spirits, but recordings moments trapped in the fabric of place. A soldier pacing the same stretch of hall, a woman crying beside a window. Not ghosts, but grooves etched into the geology of the land. Paranormal researchers call this the stone tape theory. The idea that stone, especially certain types like limestone or quartz, can store and play back emotional energy. And in the Cotswolds, with its layers of limestone and its long, haunted history, it's no wonder that stories cling to certain sites like lichen. But beyond the stone, there is something deeper, something older. The idea of ley lines. First popularized in the 1920s by Alfred Watkins, ley lines are believed to be invisible alignments connecting ancient sites across the landscape. Long barrows, stone circles, churches, hill forts, even wells and crossroads, many seem to fall into suspiciously straight lines on a map. Watkins believed these were old trackways, but others suggest something more mystical: lines of energy, currents in the earth that affect animals, people, even the weather. The Cotswolds is crisscrossed by such lines. One runs from Bellasnap through Winchcombe, past Sudeley Castle, and on toward Painswick Beacon. Another passes through Ely Long Barrow, Hetty Pegler's Tump, and ends at Nymphsfield. Some alignments even trace through multiple churches named for Saint Michael, a dragon-slaying archangel often invoked to protect sacred places from older pagan forces. Are these coincidences, or remnants of a forgotten understanding of the land? Dowsers, those who claim to sense energy beneath the surface, say they can feel these lines, like veins of warmth or vibration. Pilgrims, even today, walk them in meditative silence. And in more than one case, people have stood at the intersection of ley lines and reported a sensation of being charged, tingling skin, rushing ears, a sense of weightlessness or time slowing. But this idea is not confined to New Age belief. The ancients seem to know it too. Megalithic monuments were rarely built at random. They were placed with care on high ridges, beside springs, at places where the horizon framed the sun or moon, places that felt right. Many archaeologists now speak of liminal spaces, locations where boundaries blur, between land and sky, light and dark, life and death. In the Cotswolds, such places are common. A lonely hill where birds never sing, a path that seems to loop even when walked straight, a spring that runs dry for years, then flows blood red after heavy rain. Locals sometimes refer to them as thin places spots, where the veil between this world and the next is said to wear thin. The ancient Celts had a word for it, an ait naofa, a sacred place, a place where one might hear voices in the wind that are not one's own. In Minchinhampton, the Common is one such place, wide and empty, ringed by trees and scattered with prehistoric remains. It draws reports of ghost sightings, strange lights, and sudden shifts in temperature. Some claim to feel watched there, especially at twilight. Horses are known to shy violently at certain points, refusing to go forward no matter how they're urged. In Painswick, the churchyard's yew trees, clipped into eerie shapes, are said to stand on a ley crossing. Old legends claim that no one can count the trees correctly. The number changes with each attempt. A minor oddity perhaps, but it speaks to a deeper truth, that this land resists being fully known. Even man-made features echo this pattern. Churches built on former pagan sites, wells that predate Christianity but are now called holy, crossroads where suicides were once buried, now marked by roadside shrines or leaning posts no one dares disturb. The Cotswolds is not haunted simply because of what happened here, but because of where it happened. The land was always liminal, a crossroads of geology, belief, and human longing, a place where memory sinks into soil and stone and lingers. Perhaps this is why so many ghosts here do not seem to want to frighten. They simply remain trapped or tethered, replaying sorrow or devotion or love. Because in the Cotswolds, the very ground remembers. What is it that makes the Cotswolds so haunted? It isn't just the age of the region, though its villages are older than most cities, and its hills have seen thousands of years of human footsteps. It isn't only the stories, though they are plentiful, persistent, and lovingly passed down. And it isn't merely the scenery, though the golden stone and drifting mist make a perfect stage for memory and myth. It is something deeper, something woven into the land itself. The Cotswolds is a place of layers of time, of belief, of sorrow and celebration. Beneath each village lies an older one. Beneath every field, a forgotten burial. Beneath every church, a site once sacred to others. The landscape is not just beautiful, it is palimpsestic. Stories written over stories, never truly erased. And in this quiet countryside, there has always been room for ghosts. There is space in the silence, room in the rhythm of slower time. Shadows gather more easily on lanes where history feels close and the night comes softly. This is a place where history and folklore are not separate, but interwoven, where the tale of a Civil War soldier seen walking a churchyard is told with the same voice as a fairy sighting or a headless horseman, where rationalism never fully replaced reverence, where people may smile at old stories but rarely scoff. Perhaps that is why the Cotswolds is so haunted. Not because it suffers from more tragedy than anywhere else, but because it remembers more, because it listens, because it still walks beside its ghosts. So as you next wander through a quiet Cotswold lane, or pass the worn stones of a long-forgotten barrow, or stop to admire the peaceful silence of a churchyard at dusk, pause. Listen, not with your ears, but with something older, because in the Cotswolds, beauty and sorrow walk hand in hand. And if you listen closely enough, the land just might speak, and what it tells you may never leave.